Hi, I'm Femi OK, and you're in the stream. Today, can China keep its food scandal-free? We look at the country's struggles with food safety. Now, if you're eating right about now, you might want to finish up pretty quickly because some of the things we're about to show you might make you feel a little bit queasy. Malika Bilal, digital producer of the stream, what are you seeing out there?
The problem is it makes you feel hungry before it makes you feel queasy.
Okay.
So a little bit of both. Our community is weighing in on this,
Sure.
but they also want us to put it into perspective. So on Google Plus, one of our community members does just that. Paul writes, scandals happen everywhere, but, he writes, it's unfortunate that China's food regulatory system has become synonymous with that term. We'll talk about why on today's show. We can't do it without you, though. So tweet us your questions and comments with hashtag AJStream.
Now in our studio, we have Suzanne Chan Shiflett, and Susan is a program associate with the Wilson Center's China Environment Forum. Susan, it's really great to have you here.
Thank you.
And we'll hear more from you and your stories in just a moment. But before we do that, we're talking about food safety today, of course, but we're also keeping an eye on stories that you would like us to do. Here's what we're checking out. Tainted food in China. The issue has become more common in a country that's also the world's largest producer of food. From toxic baby formula back in 2008 to last year's seizure of fake beef, Chinese food scandals have consumers wondering what exactly is safe to eat. Now officials are in the midst of investigating how rotten meat was allowed into restaurants like McDonald's and Starbucks in China. Although the government says it has the strongest food safety laws to date, enforcement of those laws is challenging in such a huge food industry. And while Beijing is working to improve their regulatory system, safety concerns are spreading internationally as Chinese food exports grow. So today, we want to learn more about food safety issues in China and what's being done to address these concerns. So to help us talk about this, we're joined via Skype in Beijing by Jing Wang. She's a senior campaigner with Greenpeace East Asia, where she monitors food and agricultural issues. In Toronto, reporter Steve Chow, he's just completed a China food safety investigation for Al Jazeera's 101 East program. And in Indianapolis, Peter Ben Emberek is a food safety scientist with the World Health Organization. He advises the Chinese government on food safety issues. So guys, it's great to have you all here in the stream. Going to start with Steve, because when you started to investigate food safety for the next episode of 101 East, you started with a bowl of soup. Tell us about this bowl of soup and what you did with it.
Well, that's right, because China's food safety situation is so large. We're talking about 450,000 food producers. And what we wanted to do was simplify our search and our examination of where food safety was in China. So we reduced it down to a bowl of wonton noodle soup. Now, for those people who don't know what goes into a bowl of wonton noodle soup, you usually get the noodles, you have a few vegetables, you have the wontons that are usually made of pork or shrimp, depending on the region you're from, and that's basically it. So you would imagine that this bowl would mostly be made of natural ingredients. But what we found in our search is that from the farm to the producers to the restaurant level, eventually to the dinner table, every step of the way, people were cheating the system and in the end, serving consumers tainted toxic bowl of wonton noodle soup. And essentially, you can make wonton noodle soup without any real meat, without any real flour or real eggs, and the consumer wouldn't know, which is a scary thing. And we eventually took some of these samples and then took it to a lab for testing, and what we discovered was quite frightening.
All right, Steve, you must have an iron stomach, because I'm about to show our audience what happened when you made the fake wonton soup, because you really took your conviction as a journalist quite a long way. Have a look at the fake bowl of wonton soup from Steve Chow's investigation.
Thanks to our range of unknown substances, we see what started out as powder take on the smell, taste, and texture of real meat.
不错，感觉就是猪肉的香味也有了。
While the thought is a bit disgusting, It's time for a taste test. So Master Wong says that this fake bowl of wonton noodle soup tastes exactly like the real thing.
Okay.
It's time to give it a try.
How did you feel the next day, Steve?
Felt okay. Mentally, I was pretty irked out by the whole sort of taste test.
Okay, I hope you've got good
Especially
insurance.
because afterwards we found a lot of sort of scary things inside. But yeah, go ahead.
Exactly. All right, so Malika, what's the community saying?
Femi irked out. They're agreeing with those kinds of sentiments. Susan, we got this tweet from Stephen. He says the lessons haven't been learned since the milk scandal. He's referring to the 2008 scandal. Companies should be held to higher standards, and citizens are right to be skeptical. You lived in China. You visited. You were last there a year ago. What do you eat when you are there?
Well, to be honest, I think you're taking a risk somewhat every time. And Steve, that's a pretty scary video you showed. I have to say, I don't know that I'm going to be eating any food the next time I go back to China. But certainly here, I would say even in the U.S., 30% of the garlic here in the U.S. is exported from China. And when you think about 60% of underground water is polluted in China and 20% of farmland is polluted, I'll go to a Chinese grocery store and I'll try to avoid buying garlic that's from China. So it's somewhat ironic, I have to say. It's not just an issue for Chinese consumers, which certainly they bear the brunt of it, but also for all the viewers who, don't live in China want to know, well, how does it impact me? It definitely has a direct impact for us as well.
Sure.
And if I can step in here, like you're saying, Susan, it's very much so, made in China food is finding its way around the globe. 50% of all apple juice from China, in terms of U.S. sales is from China. We're seeing, raw ingredients. 80% of the world's vitamin C comes from China today, and we know that vitamin C goes into a lot of products around the world. And most of the time, when you eat or drink these products, you don't know that the vitamin C or some other element is coming from China, and that's a concern considering the lack of safety regulation at this point in China.
Absolutely.
I'm also looking at this picture on my laptop here, which is a famous beef story. Fake beef seized, 20,000 kilos of this fake beef. This fake beef was actually pork that was treated to kind of look and taste like beef, and it had paraffin wax in it and also industrial salt. Jing, when you're looking and investigating cases of fake food, what are you seeing? What's the case that really stands out for you?
Well, seeing that fake beef, that reminds me maybe the more disgusting things that I come across are that like fake mice meat that they pretend to be lamb. So that happens quite often. So I share the feeling like people are just losing trust in anything that they eat. When they go eating out, people can be really susceptible about what's the real thing on their table. And also,
how do you make mice look like lamb, Jing?
Yeah, they just add the chemical stuff, so they have that taste, and they dip that into some urine of the lamb. So it's quite shocking when you first hear that case.
Wow.
But I think the most astonishing things was that when I went to the fields to see the agriculture practice, like you mentioned before, when we go to the greenhouses, when they are producing the garlic or the ginger, how many toxic chemicals they're actually putting or spraying on those things. So I actually see those colorful seeds dipping in so many kinds of pesticides, and like every 3 or 4 days, the farmers will spray all those pesticides, and like in the really big and important agriculture provinces, they actually treat the soil, and all the pesticides are running off into the water. So I think those kind of investigation results have really worried me, accompanied by the food safety scandals all over the place on the news and in the papers.
Well, Peter, when we hear things like this, Steve, go ahead.
Yeah, if I can chime in here, Jing joined us down in Guangzhou when we were looking at the growing of vegetables in the province of Guangzhou, and immediately it took a matter of seconds for her to find a number of used pesticide packages on the ground beside the farmers' fields, and we found pesticides that were banned in the 1980s that were still being used. These are very harmful pesticides. And in Jing's research over the last several years, she found that basically China's farmers use 5 times more pesticide than anywhere else in the world. And then there's the issue of growth hormones. Nowadays we see, tomatoes the size of watermelons almost. I'm exaggerating a bit, but the amount of growth hormones being used on vegetables in China as well is enormous. And there seems to be very little control as to how much is being used, whether it be pesticides, whether it be growth hormones in all these sort of areas. And it's not only vegetables. We're seeing the overuse of pesticides and overuse of growth hormones and medicines such as antibacterial medicines, antibiotics in livestock. And once again, no limit as to how much is being used.
So Steve, our community then is asking, who do we blame for this? And Peter, I want to bring you in here. We have this tweet from Frida. She says, instead of fault finding, I prefer solutions. Regulators, food producers, foreign corporates, media, all can take action. So on that note of regulation, we have a video comment here. I'd like you to have a listen to this, Peter, and let me know what you think.
There's a common perception that if only we could test 100% of everything, it would be safe. We can't do that because if we test 100% of the food, we'll have 0% left to sell at the end of the day. Ultimately, a food safety system requires companies to want to do the right thing and then governments to check up on them. We'll never have enough money for inspectors to be everywhere or do everything that needs to be done.
So Peter, he's pretty pessimistic there. What are your thoughts?
No, I think it's very clear that that's the key dilemma or the key issue we are facing in the world of food production and food safety. And I think the previous 3 comments basically picked the 3 key issues China and many other countries in the world, in fact, are facing. It's not about lack of regulations. China has now a complete set of very modern and up-to-date regulations and standards, like many other countries, developed countries in the world. It's not about the regulation only. It's about their implementation on the ground. And there we heard the second big issue, which is overuse of pesticide, overuse of hormones, overuse of veterinary drugs, and misuse of these in the fields and in the primary production. And it's true that that's a key issue. It's like when you take medicine as a normal person when you are sick and want to treat yourself, or when you want to take vitamins, you have to do that in the right way.
Right. Susan, I saw you nodding as Peter was talking there. What was behind that agreement as he was talking?
Yeah, I think very much agree, spot on with what Peter is saying. I think that one of the things in lieu of regulations is it's very interesting. I think part of it is going to dictate where consumers decide to put their wallet. So for instance, after the big McDonald's expired meat scandal, their sales dropped within a week, 6%. And you see that right away McDonald's cut off ties with, or maybe it was KFC that cut off ties with the OSI, the US supplier whose Chinese subsidiary was selling it. So part of it
and
is
Susan, I've got a headline
consumers.
here that says McDonald's says China food scandal hurting regional results. So maybe it's just if you stop buying McDonald's because you're scared of what's in their product, that will be the biggest message, maybe bigger than regulations perhaps.
I think that, and I think Malika had talked about some of the viewers have been writing about crowdsourcing. I think that could be very promising. I think that's what the Chinese government and NGOs are doing in the air pollution space. So for instance, Alibaba, the huge internet giant, the founder made a pretty public statement by selling these air pollution monitor kits for $10 each, $10 US. And he's encouraging citizens to go and measure themselves and then put it online. And I think that if we have similar sort of things that are happening for food safety, it'll rise to the attention of regulators.
We keep going back to pesticides.
And we are seeing that happen nowadays.
Sure.
I mean, we were seeing that happen nowadays. We were in Tianjin at a university just about an hour, 2 hours away from Beijing. And there we saw a university creating food testing kits. And there nearby there was a company actually spinning these out, and they were selling them as fast as they could make them.
Wow.
And around the country, we're finding that consumers' food testing kits are selling out like
how much do they
hotcakes,
cost?
because
Are they
a lot of
expensive,
consumers
Steve?
are now.
Steve, are they
That
expensive?
ultimately is the problem. They're
Right.
still very expensive. You
Right.
know, the cheapest test for pesticides is perhaps $60, and then it goes up to $600 if you want a whole
What?
plethora of tests for all kinds of things. You know, you
Wow.
can test for cadmium in rice nowadays. You can test for pesticides that exceed the legal limit. You can test for all kinds of things. We even found some industrial chemicals inside cow tripe, and it's incredible. And that was from a small portable food testing kit. So consumers with money can, if they can afford it, and they can sort of give themselves a little peace of mind.
I know people watching this thinking, what's the big deal about pesticides? Doesn't it just, keep the pests off the vegetables, keep them nice and fresh? There's a little clip from Steve's program, 101 East, Food for Thought, where pesticides are being sprayed and you can see the immediate result. Take a look at this.
Greenpeace's own research found farmers in China on average use up to 5 times the amount of pesticides as elsewhere in the world. On one farm, the group filmed pesticides killing chicks on the spot. The group says oftentimes more than a dozen different toxins are used together.
So Jing, those chicks drop dead on the spot. If I'm watching this from China, how do I even know where to go shopping? What do you tell people? How do you advise them?
Well, yeah, I want to add on that story. We shoot that video in one of the greenhouses in Shandong province, and you cannot imagine how close that environment is, and all the farmers are exposed to the pesticide spraying, and all the kids are playing around, and all those chickens are just nearby. So you can imagine how concentrated pesticide is in that kind of environment.
Sure.
So this not only on vegetables, but also on anything that you can imagine, like the Chinese tea, like the Chinese herbs that we used to think that they are healthy for our health. So we put them in our soups. So this all has contaminated our food.
All right, so let's stop scaring people, maybe try and help them a little bit, okay? Everybody is like, I am not eating anything, and this is not possible. So, Jing, we'll move past the scary thing, and actually then what do you tell people?
So for me, I would cook myself more often. So I think that's the most realistic way to avoid eating contaminated food and gut oil and all that kind of things. And I think the most important thing is to find the food you trust. As I said, people have lost their trust in the food system in China because we see so many bad things happening, and the food producers, they are not being honest, and the inspection from the government isn't there. So we see some solutions. I think that's kind of promising, especially in the big cities like Beijing and Shanghai.
So be more connected to your food source then, Jing, is basically in summary what you're saying.
That's
know where your food is coming from, how it's being made. Malika.
I wanted to share just a thought from a community. This is from Gopi, who tweets in, China needs to implement credible oversight and monitoring mechanisms to follow the right food production procedures. Probably easier said than done, but we weren't alerted to this. This is from Frida. She says the China Food and Drug Administration launched in June a public information app, and it debunks rumors and reports blacklists, if any. I pulled that up on my screen here. You can see that here, and you can access it at cfda.gov. But Steve, what are your tips for consumers? What would you tell people going to China or who live in China? What do you recommend for them?
Well, we talked to several dozens of people as to exactly what they would do that were involved in the food industry, and many of those that were even cheating, that were whistleblowing for us, they said that what they do to ensure that the food they eat is good is that they go to restaurants that carry certain specialties. So, the restaurant that sells specialty wonton noodles, or for Susan, the Beijing restaurant that specializes in Beijing duck, because then you know that they have a name to keep, and they are very afraid of any scandals that could hurt their business. So they'll try to ensure that their food is good. Another way we've seen, for those again with money, they're starting to trace back to the farms where their produce or their livestock is coming from, and they buy directly from farms, because then they can actually go there, see how the farmers actually grow their plants or grow their livestock, if you will, and then they buy the meat or the plants, vegetables directly from them. There are now also some Chinese apps that allow you sort of to buy online and have delivery sent to your home. But once again, you need money, and it's very, very tough for the majority of people in China to afford these kind of things. What Peter was saying earlier is correct. It's not an issue of regulation. The laws are all in place, and China is putting in its newest look at this food safety law sometime hopefully this year or next year. The problem is enforcement. For the longest time, we've had 10 different ministries that have been in charge of food safety, and at the same time then there are provincial and local sort of administrations in charge of various different areas. There are major loopholes that we've found in terms of who takes care of this part of food safety or that part of food safety. There needs to be more of a streamlining of the system. Down at the farm level, farmers are telling us that, yes, they know there are so many laws restricting how much growth hormones is used or how much antibiotics is used on a pig, for example, but they say that the government inspectors, they never come by, or they're paid off by the middleman, and so they can sell sick or dead pigs to the market, and no one will ever know. So it is an issue of enforcement, and it also is an issue of trying to get the big companies on board. And we saw some sign of that with Walmart.
Okay, so this is one of the websites that Steve was talking about, where people can actually go online and buy organic food. And Susan, you were telling us earlier, just before we started the show, people are ordering food from overseas as well.
Right. Well, I think in light of the 2008, the big milk scandal, where essentially 6 infants and thousands of other infants were sickened from melamine-laced infant powder, which is a chemical that artificially makes the protein content seem higher so producers can make more money and increase their profits. Countries such as Australia and then Hong Kong have actually had to impose limits to the number of cans of infant formula that people can buy and ship back to China. And one of my colleagues spent all of last month for one of his friends. He went to USPS and had to buy, this flat rate shipping of all these milk cartons so that he could ship it back to the US.
So that's Susan Chan Shiflett. We also have Peter Ben Emmerich, Jing Wang, and Steve Chow, and they are coming with us to the post show. If you want to hear more about food safety in China, stream.aljazeera.com is the place to go. Before we head there, here's Malika with some of the other stories the stream is following.
We start in the UK, where activists from a group called the London Palestine Network occupied the roof of an Israeli-owned weapons factory. Using the hashtag #StopArmingIsrael, the group shared photos of its members scaling the building and setting up camp to protest Elbit Systems, an Israeli defense company. Activists encouraged others to join, saying it's time for the international solidarity movement to escalate its actions against those that profit from Israeli apartheid, end quote. Next, we turn to Australia, where netizens are mocking the Prime Minister for his choice of words in a speech on terrorism. When it comes to counter-terrorism, everyone needs to be part of Team Australia, Tony Abbott said Tuesday as he pledged to tighten laws. Well, the reference to Team Australia led to a flurry of online humor like this, with the hashtag used more than 3,000 times. Some used the opportunity to critique Abbott's policies. I'm not in any Team Australia that thinks winning is shaming unemployed people, punishing asylum seekers, or exploiting the environment, Brad tweets. Lastly, we look at the Rosetta spacecraft, which is close to reaching its target after a decade in space. The probe was launched by the European Space Agency to examine a comet. It's due to reach its destination on August 6th. Space enthusiasts can follow the probe's path with the hashtag Rosetta. Are we there yet? Well, for more on these stories, you can head over to stream.aljazeera.com. Amy?
While you've been reading those stories, I was paying attention, but I was slightly distracted by this beautiful bowl of wonton soup.
It does look good.
It does look good, but do you know what is in it? Steve Chow will reveal all in the next edition of 101 East on Al Jazeera English. Food for thought. It airs from August the 7th to August the 10th. And you might be surprised. I'm trying not to tell you what's in the soup. You're going to be shocked. Meanwhile, let me tell you what's on the next AJ stream. Ghana's often touted as an African economic model of success. So why are so many of its citizens protesting? And what do they actually want? We'll find out on the next AJ stream. Until then, see you online. Thanks for watching. Hello again, this is the Stream's online post show. We're talking about food safety issues in China. Let's get right back to the conversation, or I should say, let's get right back to the wonton soup. Apparently, this bowl of soup is creating quite a stir online, Steve Chow. What's our online community saying about it?
This is, Femi, one of the ones that got the most retweets and mentions online when we tweeted it out. We tweeted out 101 East's tweet. This shows both of the soups that will be found in the documentary. And of course, we're not going to give away any spoilers. You can watch the documentary for yourselves. But the question was asked, which one is completely made out of additives? Samia says the better looking one, of course, the top one. This person, free agent, says it's the bottom one, the basic Cantonese wonton noodle soup. It also has the complete basic additives like the green leaf. So clearly, people have no idea, Steve. Was there anything after your investigation that you were completely shocked with that you will share with our audience today?
Well, I can say that we were very shocked with the amount of chemicals we found in the bowl of wonton noodle soup that was made entirely by fake additives. We thought we'd find some semi-harmful things, that sort of thing, but we actually found a number of banned toxic substances. In one case, a teaspoon of the substance, once ingested, could kill a child. So it says very much, according to many experts out there, that much of the food industry in China is still not very afraid of the Chinese government's new tough regulations, nor are they very much afraid that they'll get caught. And so they continue to cheat the system, irregardless of the harm that it's creating or putting on consumers.
So Peter, of course, because your background with the WHO, there's a medical connection between you investigating food safety and people's actual health. What should we be concerned about health-wise? Nobody likes the idea of eating things that we didn't know we were buying. But beyond that, beyond the ruse, what should we be worried about our actual physical health?
It's true that if you really want to do something or be careful about what you are consuming, it's very important to, in a way, spread the risks. And therefore, if you are unsure about what you are consuming, one good way forward is to eat diversified. Diversified your exposure to whatever risk might be one of the things you are consuming.
So if you like wonton soup like Steve does, don't eat it every single day, because if it does have something in that's really poisonous, you're eventually going to poison yourself over time.
Exactly. But still, we need somehow to find a way to get those who don't want to play by the rules out of this market. The crooks who are producing fake food, the crooks who are frauding and cheating consumers should not be allowed to put food on the market.
Sure.
I have a question for Peter, if I can.
It's happening everywhere. Remember last year the horse meat scandal in Europe?
Yes.
You will always find someone who wants to cut corners and make because of greed or ignorance.
And Peter, that horse meat scandal was that horse meat was coming up in dishes where people didn't realize that they were buying horse meat. So it's coming up in lasagna and things where they thought they were buying beef, etc.
Exactly. It was sold as the price of beef, which is much higher, and therefore the consumer were cheated.
Sure.
It was not unsafe. Horse meat is not dangerous in itself.
No.
But consumers were not given what they were paying for.
Sure. Steve, what did you say? You were just piping up there. What did you want to add?
Yes, Peter, I know you've worked alongside the Chinese government, helping them sort of work on their regulations over several decades now. My question really is, where are they in terms of traceability? I know that in a lot of countries, you can if a tainted pork is found in the supermarket, they can trace it back to the exact farm where that pig came from. Where is China with that? Because I know that a lot of places where we went to, there was no such traceability program in place.
It's moving, like many other aspects of food safety, is moving very fast. Traceability systems are being developed, like surveillance systems are being developed, monitoring systems are being developed. So all the different elements of an efficient, credible food safety systems are being built as we speak.
And how confident are you that? Yeah, how confident are you that it'll sort of be corruption-free and away from influence?
The corruption side is a different story. But what is important to note, and we should not forget, is that the safety of food, processed food in particular, is the responsibility of the producers. It's not the government, it's not the consumers, it's the responsibility of the producers. They are the one producing the food, they are the one putting the food on the market, and they are the one taking the responsibility for it to be safe. The government is there to provide the framework and make sure that all the producers are playing by the rules, following the standards, following the regulations.
Sure.
But it's not their responsibility. And as consumers, we have a role to play, but it's not our responsibility. We have to, for example, make sure that we don't mess around with raw meat in our kitchens, that we don't consume or keep food too long beyond its shelf life, things like that. So we also have a role. We also have a role in being informed consumers, in making informed choices when we buy food.
If we know what those options are. Okay, let me just jump back to the community and Malika.
Right. Well, Jing, I actually want to bring you in here with picking up on that role of the consumer. Our community is asking, are they doing enough to demand private companies to be held accountable? So El Hadji writes in, civil society needs to form a consumer protection agency to work closely with the multitude of state inspection teams. Are efforts like that happening?
Well, actually, I want to first add on this traceability issue we're just talking about. Like, I know in the food safety law, there are already regulation provisions on setting up traceability of the companies, but also like it's a requirement, like all the producers should have a tracking record of what they're putting in the food. But I wouldn't say that China have done much of a progress in that regard, because we have 200 million small-scale farmers and millions of food producers. So I think that's still a long way to go. So I think with then on the consumer's end, what we can do is that I can see that there's already an increasing number of people, especially in the big cities, are proactively searching for solutions, like the community supported agriculture. So they actually trust those farmers. Then they buy from those farms, and they go to the organic farmers market. I think that can be some of the part of the solutions to the city consumers.
Sure.
But with the majority of consumers, I wouldn't say the community or the civil society has been powerful enough to support the consumers, because
Right.
like the consumer association in China are still semi-official, and they are still playing the function as, you know, helping to educate the people, but not really safeguarding people's rights. I think that's one of the main loopholes in the current regulation and practice in this food system.
Before
I
we go,
believe that accountability is a big issue.
Right.
Like Jing said, we found, for example, during the melamine scandal in 2008, there were groups that were formed to try to help, those victims of the melamine scandal. But at the same time, the government at some point got wary of groups becoming too large and too powerful, and they essentially shut them down. And I think that's a serious concern, that if there are consumer advocacy groups that are out there really with a true intent of helping consumers, the government should allow them to sort of continue and sort of foster this sort of education, so that, if one scandal pops up, there's enough information out there for consumers to stay away from that. Right now, we're not seeing enough of that in China. And it might just be because the government is wary of too much public indictment of the food safety situation. There's also an issue of corruption that I've mentioned already a few times, that sometimes, provincial or local level, officials or inspectors are involved in with big companies to cheat
Sure.
consumers, and they try to stop things. But I think that without this accountability, without more social advocacy groups, it would be very hard to keep these big producers who are ultimately responsible to account.
there is something that nobody has mentioned, and it just occurred to me as I was watching some of these examples of food being tainted, which is just that some people are just plain evil. Why would I say that? I want you to look at how gutter oil is produced. This is a really famous case in China. This report is from Radio Free Asia about how gutter oil is actually made. Have a look at this.
It's all in a day's work for this woman. She opens up a manhole cover and scoops out as much slop as she can, delighted by what she finds. What others might view as revolting, she sees as a bonanza. She works in the streets of the southern Chinese city of Shenzhen, a foot soldier in China's so-called gutter oil industry. After more than 10 years in the business, she says she's made enough money to build a house for her family back in her home village 1,000 miles to the north. Her slop eventually winds up in a processing plant like this one, where it's combined with other animal fat refuse to create recycled cooking oil. Workers put the oil in barrels for delivery to restaurants.
Okay, so I wish you could have seen Susan's face as she was watching that. You were absolutely grossed out. This to me is not about regulation, not about knowing how processing is done. This is just to me, it's like, why would you do this to people? Why would you put toxins in baby formula? Why would you get oil out of the gutter and then sell it back to restaurants? That to me is just a level of being ethical, maybe in food production. Why is that missing? Are these just rare cases?
You know, I think as Peter mentioned, that clearly isn't only something that people in China do. I think in other parts of the world as well. I do think though that because of, you know, the opening up of China, and similar with other countries as well, when they first really start to rapidly develop, you're kind of in this sort of Wild West sort of situation, right?
Yeah.
And very much kind of a starting, like think of a startup, as Jing had mentioned, there's, and Steve had mentioned also 450,000 domestic producers. Almost 80% of them have less than 10 people. So think of it, it's just like these, basically the size of a family that are processing. They don't necessarily have standards that are in place. There's not that much oversight. So part of it is, I mean, unfortunately, I think just part of kind of like growing pains, you startup sort of phase.
Sure.
Anything goes.
All right, let me just leave this with Malika and the community because I have to wrap up. So just guests hold tight. We're going to take this conversation online. But Malika, what's the final words from our community?
The final word is a recommendation. This is an answer to our question on what can China do to instill faith in the food industry. This person says simply by showing the country's food poisoning statistics per year on national television.
Or maybe just showing that little clip of gutter oil. That might actually do it too.
Would do it.
Very effective. Thank you very much to all of our guests, Susan Chan-Shiflett, Steve Chow, Jing Wong, and Peter Ben Emberick. And don't forget, let me just go back to that very delicious looking plate of soup there from Food for Thought 101 East. That airs August the 7th to the 10th on Al Jazeera English. Meanwhile, on the next stream, Ghana is often hailed as an African economic success story, but do its citizens see it in the same way? Join us for that discussion next time. Thanks for watching. Take care.